My own daughter laughed when I fell. Her husband joined in, said I belonged in a nursing home. They thought I was too old, too broken to fight back. But I didn't raise her to mock pain. I raised her better. Now the neighbors laugh at them. And I'm the reason they're packing their perfect lives into boxes. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The thought struck Jeanette Clark the moment her daughter's front door swung open. She stood on the marble entryway, shifting her weight off her aching right leg, the limp subtle but undeniable. Melissa's face brightened just long enough for Cameron to appear behind her, lips curved into a smirk that didn't bother disguising itself as warmth. "What?" Cameron drawled, eyes flicking down to her leg. Did the sidewalk fight back? Melissa's laughter came sharp and nervous, like glass cracking under pressure. She pressed a manicured hand against her mouth, as if she might swallow it down, but her eyes gleamed with the same cruelty. "Mom, you're so dramatic." Jeanette kept her smile steady, though it felt like a mask made of porcelain, fragile, hollow, ready to break. She let them lead her into the dining room, where the scent of rosemary chicken mingled with something far less palatable, smugness. The candles flickered, polished silverware gleamed, but no matter how beautiful the table looked, the seat offered to her at the end felt more like a witness stand than a place of welcome. Melissa poured the wine, her voice syrupy sweet. "I'm glad you made it even with your accident. It was just a fall," Jeanette murmured, reaching for her water instead. The ice clinked against the glass, louder than her words. "Just a fall," Cameron echoed, chuckling as he carved the chicken. "One banana peel away from slapstick, huh?" Melissa giggled, a high, brittle sound, and then quickly busied herself with the salad bowl, as if the lettuce suddenly required all her focus. Jeanette didn't answer. She cut into her chicken with surgical precision, every slice clean, controlled. Years of nursing had taught her how to stay steady, how to maintain composure even when pain threatened to rattle her bones. They thought her silence meant weakness. They didn't notice it was armor. The conversation floated around her, Melissa talking about a neighborhood luncheon, Cameron bragging about his latest golf score. Not once did they ask how she was healing. Not once did they notice her wincing when she shifted in the chair. To them, her pain wasn't real. It was material. Something to twist into a joke. By dessert, she'd stopped listening. The chocolate tortillon might as well have been ash in her mouth. Her eyes wandered to the windows, where dusk pressed shadows across the manicured lawn, and the faint hum of cicadas reminded her that the world outside kept moving, indifferent to this dining room's poison. She excused herself earlier than usual. Melissa offered a hug that felt obligatory, Cameron gave a dismissive drive safe, and Jeanette stepped back into the cool Kentucky night. The air smelled faintly of honeysuckle, but it couldn't mask the bitterness settling in her chest. At home, she moved slowly through the quiet rooms of her house, the limp sharper now that no one was watching. She should have gone straight to bed. She should have rested her swollen ankle. But the faint sound of laughter carried across the still night, faint but unmistakable, from Melissa's kitchen window across the yard. She paused at her own window. Lights off, curtains parted just enough. Their voices drifted through the evening, blurred but cruelly clear. Cameron's baritone cut through first. "She's one banana peel away from assisted living." Melissa's laugh followed, louder this time, without the restraint she had shown earlier. "Don't say that," she teased, though she said it like encouragement, not disapproval. "You'll make me choke." The two of them howled together, forks clinking against plates, utterly delighted by her humiliation. Jeanette's throat tightened. For a moment she felt 17 again, standing at the edge of a high school cafeteria, watching the table of girls whisper behind their hands. Laughter turned into knives. She had told herself then that adulthood would erase that kind of cruelty. She was wrong. It only sharpened with age. Her hand drifted to the window latch, fingers tightening, not out of a need for fresh air, but to ground herself. The metal was cold, steadying. She didn't cry. She didn't storm outside. She simply watched the shadows of her daughter and son-in-law dance across their kitchen, their amusement echoing like a cruel refrain. Then, slowly, Jeanette closed the curtains. She walked to the front door, the limp still there, but carrying new weight, new meaning. She opened it, stepped onto her porch, and let the night air wash over her. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more conviction than any dinner table smile she had worn that night. "All right then," she said to the dark, to the cicadas, to herself. "Laugh while you can." The words formed in Jeanette's mind as her fingers hovered over her phone the following morning. Her ankle ached with every step, a dull reminder of the laughter that had followed her home like a shadow. Melissa had already texted, "Next Thursday, dinner." The message glowed on the screen, breezy and casual, as though the night before had been nothing but polite conversation and polite wine. Jeanette typed back only 3 clipped words, "Not this week." Then, with the kind of precision that comes from years of measured patience, she hit send. The reply was silence, at least for an hour. Then came the knock. Jeanette opened the door to find Melissa standing on the porch, face painted in concern that felt as authentic as plastic flowers in a vase. "Mom," Melissa said, the words stretching like taffy, "you didn't sound like yourself in that text. Is everything okay?" Jeanette stepped back but didn't invite her in. The late morning sun angled across the porch, throwing Melissa's perfectly highlighted hair into a halo that didn't match the sharp calculation in her eyes. "I'm fine," Jeanette said. "Just need rest." Melissa's mouth curved into a sympathetic pout. "Of course, you seemed upset last night. You know Cameron jokes. You always take things so." Jeanette's gaze was steady, her silence more powerful than any retort. She didn't fidget, didn't blink. She simply let the words die in the air between them, like flies hitting glass. Melissa shifted, clutching her designer purse a little tighter. "Well," she said finally, "if you need anything, we're just across the way." "I know where you live," Jeanette answered softly, the corners of her mouth turning up in the faintest of smiles. Melissa blinked, unsettled, then retreated down the steps with a brightness that rang false. "Feel better, Mom." The screen door clicked shut. Jeanette exhaled slowly. The house was hers again, quiet, controlled, filled with the faint scent of lavender from the sachets she tucked into every drawer. It was Darlene Bishop who broke that quiet later in the afternoon. She arrived without knocking, as she always did, carrying a Tupperware of cornbread and the energy of someone who thrived on knowing things. At 71, Darlene's posture was straighter than women 20 years younger, her silver hair a crown she wore with authority. "You've got that look," Darlene said, setting the cornbread on the counter and narrowing her eyes. "Something's eating you." Jeanette considered brushing it off. But then she saw Darlene's hands, the faint tremor in the way she smoothed her skirt. Those hands had held her through grief after her husband passed, had delivered soup when the flu left her bedridden, had folded laundry side by side during long talks. So Jeanette told her, quietly at first, then with more detail, the smirk, the laugh, the words that still rang in her ears, one banana peel away from assisted living. Darlene's lips thinned into a hard line. "Those 2 jackals," her voice carried the edge of tempered steel, "and your own daughter? No, we're not letting that slide." Jeanette felt something loosen in her chest. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding the shame until Darlene's outrage cut it open. They moved to the porch, settling into the wicker chairs as the sun slipped lower, painting the cul-de-sac in shades of gold. The cicadas buzzed, neighbors watered their lawns, and life went on around them. But on that porch a storm was forming. Jeanette poured the tea, the clink of porcelain against wood marking the rhythm of their conversation. Darlene leaned forward, voice low, like a conspirator. "They think they're untouchable. They forget I sit on that HOA board. And honey, I keep receipts." Jeanette stirred her tea slowly, a small smile tugging at her lips. For the first time since her fall, she felt her footing returning, not on her ankle, but on something deeper. She rose, walked inside, and returned with a thick binder worn at the edges. She set it on the table between them, with a deliberate thud. The cover read, Homeowners Association Regulations. Sticky notes jutted out from its sides, like flags marking territory. Jeanette's fingers brushed across the tabs, each one labeled in tidy handwriting. She looked at Darlene, eyes steady, calm and fierce all at once. Let's see how many rules they've already broken. Jeanette turned the stiff pages of the HOA handbook, while Darlene leaned in, glasses perched at the tip of her nose. The binder's tabs looked like tiny flags of war, each one a reminder that order and rules were not suggestions, they were obligations. Let's start easy, Darlene said, flipping to a dog-eared page. She tapped the section with a manicured nail. Deck extensions must be approved by the board prior to construction. Guess whose wasn't? Jeanette could picture it, Cameron in his polo shirt, barking orders to contractors, while Melissa lounged with her wine, bragging to anyone within earshot about their custom outdoor entertainment space. She'd noticed no permits displayed, no notices posted. At the time she had brushed it off as none of her concern. Now, it gleamed like opportunity. Cameron's deck, Jeanette said, her voice calm, almost reverent. Check, Darlene replied, writing it down with the satisfaction of a general marking enemy positions. They moved on. Noise ordinances. No excessive gatherings, especially on weeknights. What do we call those driveway cocktail parties Melissa insists on? Jeanette almost laughed. Almost. She thought of the booming music, the cars clogging the cul-de-sac, the fake laughter spilling into the night, while children in the neighborhood tried to sleep. She remembered once calling to remind Melissa of the time, only to be dismissed with, "Oh Mom, lighten up." Violation, Jeanette murmured, sharper this time. Darlene's pen scratched across the page. Check. Hours passed in quiet rhythm. Flip, review, discuss, record. The afternoon light shifted across Jeanette's living room, turning gold and heavy. Her ankle throbbed less when her focus was here, on paper and proof, instead of pain and memory. They didn't just rely on rules, they built a case. Darlene pulled out a folder, already thick with neighborhood gripes. Photos of Cameron's deck jutting illegally close to the fence line. Notes about loud parties logged with dates and times. Even screenshotted complaints from neighbors on community message boards. This isn't pettiness, Darlene said firmly. This is about respect. They think rules don't apply to them. Well, honey, rules are the one thing that always apply. Jeanette traced a finger over one photograph, Cameron laughing on the deck, a beer in his hand, Melissa draped beside him like a queen surveying her domain. Neither of them noticed the neighbor's child peeking from behind the blinds in the background, face weary from sleepless nights. A soft chime of the front door bell interrupted their work. Jeanette opened it to find Lacey Grant, holding a paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon and butter. "Thought you could use some muffins," Lacey said. Her tone casual, but her eyes held curiosity. She glanced at the spread of papers across the coffee table. "Looks like homework." Darlene smirked but said nothing. Jeanette accepted the bag, the warm scent spilling into the room, mingling with the sharp ink and paper smell of their research. "Thank you, Lacey." Lacey lowered her voice, leaning slightly closer. "You didn't hear this from me, but people notice things. The noise, the deck, the attitude." She paused, as though weighing the risk of saying more. "Let's just say you wouldn't be alone in wanting something done." Jeanette felt the corners of her mouth lift, slow and deliberate. "Good," she said softly. "Let them." Lacey nodded once, satisfied, and slipped away, leaving the faint sweetness of sugar and truth in her wake. The house grew quiet again. Darlene capped her pen with a decisive click. "We've got enough to rattle their perfect little cage." Jeanette rose, gathering the evidence into a neat pile. Her movements were careful, deliberate, each page stacked like ammunition. She slipped the documents into a plain envelope. No handwriting, no trace. She smoothed the flap shut, pressing down with the flat of her palm. As dusk crept over Lexington, she walked with steady steps to the HOA office drop box tucked near the community clubhouse. Crickets hummed in the hedges, and a faint breeze rustled the papers inside the slot as she slid her envelope through. The sound was soft, almost insignificant, but to Jeanette, it was the echo of a trigger pulled. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, folded neatly inside a white HOA envelope, stamped with the Lexington cul-de-sac crest. Melissa tore it open at the kitchen island, while Cameron buttered his toast, his golf shirt already tucked crisp into khakis. Her eyes darted down the page, lips moving as she read. Slowly her face pinched in disbelief. "You have got to be kidding me." Cameron looked up, a smear of jam still on his knife. "What now?" She shoved the letter across the granite. "Violation notice, noise complaints, unauthorized construction." He skimmed it, his smirk dissolving into something darker. These old bats with too much time on their hands. He crumpled the paper in his fist. "This is harassment." From her porch across the street, Jeanette sat with her tea, pretending to read the newspaper. The words blurred on the page. What she really listened to was Cameron's rising voice, sharp enough to slice through the morning air. "Noise complaints," he barked, pacing toward the back deck. "This is a neighborhood, not a cemetery." Melissa followed, her tone shrill and defensive. "I told you the deck would be a problem if we didn't file the paperwork." Their words carried across the manicured lawns, over picket fences and flower beds. But what traveled further than their anger was the silence of neighbors who stopped waving. One by one, the subtle gestures disappeared. The morning nod from Mr. Elkins, the wave from the jogger at the corner, even the cheerful hello from the young couple next door. Where once the Harpers commanded attention, now they found themselves met with eyes that looked past them. Jeanette folded her paper slowly, savoring the shift. The Harpers were no longer the cul-de-sac royalty. They were the subject of whispers. At Thursday's HOA board meeting, Darlene tapped the folder of evidence against the polished oak table. "We enforce standards, after all," she said, her smile aimed like a weapon. The room hummed with approval. A few neighbors chuckled under their breath. Someone muttered, "About time." Jeanette sat in the back, hands folded in her lap, face composed. She didn't need to speak. Darlene did that well enough for both of them. When the meeting adjourned, Melissa and Cameron's absence spoke louder than their presence ever had. The ripples reached even further. A day later, Lacey Grant rearranged the chalkboard sign outside her bakery. The words drawn in looping white script, "Read quiet hours appreciated. After 9 p.m. Thank you." Customers chuckled as they walked in, casting knowing glances toward the Harpers' corner of the neighborhood. The air inside the bakery smelled of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee, but beneath it lingered something sweeter: satisfaction. Jeanette stopped by for a scone, the sign catching her eye. "Subtle," she said to Lacey, who slid her a wink. By Saturday, Cameron's temper boiled over. He stormed across the cul-de-sac, fists clenched, jaw tight, the sun glaring off his bald spot. Jeanette was trimming her hydrangeas, the soft snip of clippers steady in her hands. "Jeanette," his voice cracked like thunder. "You know about this, don't you?" He waved the crumpled letter like a battle flag. "Whoever's behind it is going to regret it. I swear I'll—" She didn't drop her clippers. She didn't step back. She turned, slow and deliberate, eyes meeting his with the calm of someone who had nothing left to fear. "Maybe," she said, her voice low but cutting, "someone's tired of being mocked." The words hung between them, like a guillotine, and for the first time, Cameron had no ready laugh. Jeanette stood in the electronics aisle at the local garden supply center, the hum of fluorescent lights above her, staring at a row of sleek doorbell cameras. She wasn't the type for gadgets, never cared much for technology beyond her phone and the occasional online grocery order. But tonight, as she traced her fingers along the glossy box of a model with discreet audio, it felt less like shopping and more like arming herself. 2 days later, the doorbell chimed. Jeanette shuffled carefully to the door, her limp faint but still present. On the other side stood Cameron, a Pyrex casserole dish balanced in his hands, covered with aluminum foil. His smile was exaggerated, teeth bared, eyes sharp. "Melissa thought you could use dinner," he said, his tone syrupy with false kindness. He thrust the dish forward. You know, since cooking must be tricky now that you're off balance. Jeanette accepted it silently, her face unreadable. The new doorbell camera blinked once, recording. As he stepped back, Cameron chuckled to himself, muttering just loud enough, "Whole neighborhood's gonna need guardrails once you start walking around again." Melissa's voice floated from the car idling at the curb, laughing through the open window. "Honestly, why doesn't she just go to a home?" The words sliced through the warm spring air, sharper than any knife. The casserole in Jeanette's hands suddenly weighed 100 pounds. She closed the door without another word, her pulse steady but her fingers tight around the dish. That night she called Darlene. "I need your computer." Darlene arrived within minutes, laptop tucked under her arm like a weapon. They sat at Jeanette's kitchen table, the faint smell of casserole cooling between them. Jeanette showed her the camera app, her hands trembling just slightly as she navigated the screen. "Here," Jeanette said, pressing play. The recording filled the room, Cameron's mocking tone, Melissa's laughter like nails on glass. The words replayed, undeniable, captured forever. Darlene's face flushed red with fury. Those two, she stopped herself, exhaled, then clicked through the app. "Let's save this, properly." Together they extracted the audio file, labeling it neatly and tucking it away on a flash drive. Darlene carried like a holy relic. She slipped it into her purse. "This isn't just gossip anymore, Jeanette. This is evidence." The next morning, the flash drive sat on Franklin Chase's oak desk. Franklin's silver hair combed back, glasses perched low, leaned forward in his leather chair. He listened with the patience of a man used to parsing lies from truth. When Cameron's mutter played, his brow furrowed. When Melissa's words echoed, his jaw tightened. Finally he clicked pause. "That's harassment, and it's admissible." His voice was measured, confident, like a surgeon diagnosing what he already knew. Jeanette sat across from him, hands folded neatly, watching him not with gratitude, but with grim certainty. She had known the moment the words left their mouths that they were guilty. Hearing Franklin confirm it was only validation. "Send me copies," Franklin continued. "We'll add this to the record. If they want to laugh in court, they'll be laughing at themselves." Jeanette nodded once, but before she could stand, Franklin leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "There's something else you need to know." Jeanette's stomach sank. "What is it?" Franklin pulled a folder from the corner of his desk, flipping it open with deliberate slowness. "In the process of pulling background for your case, I ran a search on recent filings. Cameron submitted paperwork last month, medical power of attorney." Jeanette blinked, confused. "What?" Franklin's voice dropped, each word deliberate. "He listed himself as your decision maker. Signed your name." The room chilled. Jeanette gripped the arms of her chair, the wood digging into her palms. "That's impossible." I know," Franklin cut in, calm but firm. "Which makes it fraud. Dangerous fraud. If anything had happened to you, they would have controlled everything." For the first time in weeks, Jeanette's composure cracked. Her breath came short, anger and betrayal knotting in her chest. She thought the laughter had been the deepest wound. She was wrong. This was darker. Franklin leaned forward, steady and unwavering. "Jeanette, this isn't just about humiliation anymore. They're trying to own your future." The hum of his office clock filled the silence that followed, every tick a reminder of how close she had come to losing everything. Jeanette's voice was low, sharp, certain. "Not anymore." Jeanette sat in Franklin Chase's office, the morning light spilling across polished oak and stacks of case files. The revelation of Cameron's forged paperwork still pulsed in her chest, like a bruise that hadn't stopped deepening. Franklin slid a new set of documents across the desk, his eyes steady. "We're moving fast," he said. "First I'll file to have the fraudulent power of attorney revoked. Then you'll complete your own directives. This time on your terms." Jeanette picked up the pen. Her hand shook once, but she tightened her grip. Years of charting patients' fates in hospital notes had taught her the weight of ink. Now for the first time she charted her own. Line by line, she filled in her wishes, no daughter, no son-in-law deciding her care. No mocking voices, claiming her pain was exaggeration. She wrote the names of people she trusted. Darlene Bishop, her constant friend, Franklin Chase, the lawyer who looked at her, not with pity but with strategy. Her handwriting was careful, even elegant. Each stroke of the pen was defiance. When she finished, Franklin notarized the papers with a firm stamp. The sound echoed through the office, final and unshakable. "You've taken their power away," Franklin said. "From now on, they have no control. Legally, financially, or medically. They tried to put you under their thumb. Now the thumb's on them." For the first time in weeks, Jeanette let out a laugh. Not bitter, not forced, a quiet laugh that felt like air finally returning to her lungs. That afternoon, Darlene joined her in the kitchen, the scent of lemon zest sharp in the air. Jeanette slid the new directives across the table. Darlene read them, her brows rising, then looked at her friend with something close to pride. "Well, damn," she said softly. "You've cut them out clean." Jeanette poured tea, the sound of liquid filling the porcelain cup steady. "Sure. They wanted to decide how I live, how I die. That ends now." The doorbell rang. Lacey Grant stood on the porch, holding a bakery box tied with twine. She lifted it with both hands like an offering. "It's not much," Lacey said with a smile. "But I baked you something. Lemon tart, fresh." Jeanette opened the box, the golden crust and sugared glaze gleaming. The citrus scent filled the air, bright and alive. On top, in delicate icing script, were 4 words, "You're not done yet." Jeanette's throat tightened. She touched the box with careful fingers. "Thank you, Lacey," neighbors whispered as word spread. Though not about the documents, which remained private. It was something else, something subtler. People said Jeanette seemed different. Not the woman limping quietly, shrinking from her daughter's laughter. No, she walked straighter now, her eyes sharper, her silence heavier, charged with unspoken strength. At the post office, Mrs. Elkins leaned close. "You look renewed." At the bakery, a man at the counter whispered to his wife, "Jeanette Clark's not to be trifled with anymore." Even Melissa noticed. She passed Jeanette in the cul-de-sac one evening, jogging half-heartedly in designer athleisure, and paused mid-stride. Her greeting was tentative. "Hi, Mom." Jeanette didn't slow her pace. She didn't even look up. Her only reply was the steady sound of her cane tapping against the pavement. A week later, Cameron tore open his mail at the kitchen island, Melissa sipping wine beside him. His brow furrowed as he scanned the letter, then darkened into fury. "What is it?" Melissa asked, unease creeping into her tone. He slammed the paper down. "They're investigating me. Elder coercion. Some attorney filed the complaint." Melissa's glass clinked hard against the counter. "What? That's insane." "Who would?" Cameron crumpled the letter in his fist, his face red, veins straining at his temple. Across the street, Jeanette sat on her porch, sipping her tea as the sun dipped low. She couldn't hear their words, but she didn't need to. She could see Cameron's rage, Melissa's panic, and for the first time, she allowed herself a smile that wasn't a mask but a weapon. The storm was no longer coming. It was already here. Jeanette first noticed it on a humid Saturday morning, pruning her hydrangeas while cicadas sang in the trees. Beyond the hedge, Cameron's voice carried like a hammer, sharp, booming, punctuated with curses. She stepped carefully onto her back porch, shielding her eyes from the glare of the sun, and there it was, fresh lumber stacked along the fence line, a half-built pergola stretching skyward like a skeleton in the dirt. Her lips curved. No permits taped to the fence, no HOA notices posted. Just Cameron's arrogance, nailed together with crooked beams. By afternoon, Darlene arrived, straw hat tilted, clipboard in hand. She peered over the hedge with a scoff. "Lord above, that's not just tacky, that's illegal." Jeanette raised a brow. "Zoning? Exactly." Darlene flipped through her clipboard until she found the clause. No backyard structures without board approval. No exceptions. She snapped the page shut. "Looks like Cameron just handed us another gift." Jeanette fetched her phone, the camera shutter clicking like a drumbeat. She circled the yard slowly, framing each shot the unapproved posts, the lumber spilling past property lines, Cameron's tool bag left unattended on the grass. She caught Melissa lounging nearby, sunglasses perched on her head, scrolling her phone while her husband grunted under the weight of his project. The photos glowed bright on Jeanette's screen, neat and damning. That evening, she uploaded them with steady fingers and filed a report with the county. 3 days later, the fine arrived. The HOA letter, bold and official, landed in the Harper's mailbox. Melissa's shriek echoed across the cul-de-sac, followed by Cameron's furious bellow. Unbelievable. They're bleeding us dry. The pergola stood unfinished, wood warping in the Kentucky heat, a monument to his failed dominion, but the Harpers weren't finished lashing out. On the community Facebook page, Melissa's friend Sabrina posted cryptically, "Some people should focus less on spying and more on their own sad lives." The comments trickled in, half-hearted emojis, a few sympathetic notes, but most neighbors remained silent. Others replied coolly with links to city ordinances, pointed reminders about noise and property codes. For once, Melissa's circle of allies offered her no shield. Jeanette, meanwhile, prepared her front yard. She set up wicker chairs and lace tablecloths, arranging teapots and lemon cookies under the shade of her maple tree. A vase of fresh roses brightened the table, their fragrance mingling with the warm scent of Earl Grey. The invitations hadn't been formal, just murmured words at the bakery, nods exchanged by mailboxes, but at 2 o'clock they came. First Mrs. Elkins with her peach cobbler, then the Millers with their twins, then neighbors Jeanette barely knew but who smiled warmly as they stepped onto her lawn. 12 in all. They sat, they poured tea, they laughed softly in the summer air. Across the street, Melissa peeked through her blinds, face pale. Cameron stood behind her, jaw clenched, watching the gathering they hadn't been invited to. Jeanette raised her teacup with steady grace. She wasn't hiding in shadows anymore. She was hosting, and the neighborhood chose to sit with her. The afternoon sun stretched long over the cul-de-sac, laughter rolling gently across the yards. When the guests began to leave, offering thanks and small hugs, Jeanette felt something she hadn't in weeks. Belonging reclaimed. Lacey lingered until the end, wiping crumbs from her hands. She leaned close, her voice low enough that only Jeanette could hear. "You should hear what Melissa said about you at the salon," she murmured, eyes glittering with mischief. "And don't worry, I have the receipt." The recording played from Lacey's phone, tinny but merciless. Jeanette sat at her kitchen table, her tea untouched, while Melissa's voice filled the room, sharp, mocking, dripping with disdain. "Did you see her fall?" Melissa laughed, like a tree tipping in slow motion. "Honestly, she should be in a home. She's embarrassing herself." The sound of other women chuckling in the salon followed, a chorus of cruelty. Jeanette's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. Darlene, perched in the next chair, slammed her palm against the table. "That vile—" She cut herself short, exhaling hard. Lacey, calm as ever, locked her phone and slid it across the table. "It's yours if you want it. I thought you should hear it before. Well, before others do." Jeanette didn't answer. Instead, she reached for her pen, jotting Franklin's number on a notepad. Her silence was heavy, deliberate. By afternoon, Franklin had the file. He listened through once, expression unreadable, then leaned back in his chair with a sigh. "Perfect," he said simply. "We'll log this alongside the doorbell audio. This isn't just idle gossip anymore, it's part of a pattern. Emotional abuse, neglect, mockery. They're digging their own grave, and we're just handing them the shovel." Jeanette gave a single nod. She didn't need to gloat. The evidence spoke louder than she ever could. That evening, Darlene moved with quiet efficiency. She uploaded the clip to a private drive, attached it to an email, and sent it not to Franklin this time, but to the neighborhood newsletter board. Her message had no signature, no name. Just residents should know what kind of neighbors they have among them. By morning, the whisper had become a wildfire. Group chats lit up with the audio file. Phones buzzed in kitchens, in garages, at backyard barbecues. People who once greeted Melissa with polite smiles now pressed their lips tight, avoiding her gaze. The echo of her cruelty was everywhere. The blow landed hardest at the bakery, Melissa had come in for her usual coffee, heels clicking across the tile, head held high. But the air inside was different. Stiff, charged. Conversations stilled as she walked in, then resumed in low murmurs once she ordered. Finally, a woman at the counter turned, phone in hand. "Melissa," she said, not unkindly, but with pointed curiosity, "is this really you?" She hit play. The laughter spilled into the air, unmistakable. Melissa's face flushed. "That's not someone edited that," she stammered, eyes darting toward Lacey. "People twist things, you all know how rumors are." But no one nodded. No one defended her. The silence weighed heavier than accusation. Lacey handed Melissa her coffee with a smile that was almost too kind. "Have a nice day." Melissa left without a word, her heels clicking faster than when she came in. Across town, Jeanette stayed quiet. She didn't post online. She didn't attend meetings. She didn't correct or defend. Her silence became its own weapon, more cutting than rebuttals. And the quieter she stayed, the louder Melissa's shame rang. At the next HOA meeting, the board chair cleared his throat and read from a prepared statement. His voice was level, but his words carried weight. "Due to repeated violations, complaints, and behavior unbecoming of community members, the Harpers are hereby sanctioned. A community vote will be held to determine suspension of privileges, pool, clubhouse, and event access." Jeanette, seated in the back row, folded her hands in her lap, her lips curved faintly, as neighbors leaned forward, whispering eagerly, already deciding how they would vote. The storm she'd set in motion was gathering speed, and this time, the Harpers couldn't hide from it. The community clubhouse smelled faintly lemon polish and nervous sweat, its folding chairs arranged in neat rows beneath the low hum of fluorescent lights. Residents shuffled in, murmurs filling the air like the rustle of dry leaves. Tonight wasn't just another HOA meeting. Tonight the neighborhood would decide whether Melissa and Cameron Harper still held sway, or whether their reign ended in disgrace. And Jeanette Clark wasn't about to miss it. She arrived just as the clock struck 7, her steps steady, cane in hand. Her dress was a deep navy, perfectly pressed, her silver hair swept back into an elegant twist. Pearls at her neck gleamed under the harsh lights, but what struck the neighbors most wasn't the jewelry or the dress, it was her presence, controlled, regal, unshaken. Murmurs followed her as she crossed the room. "She looks incredible," one whispered. "Strong," another added. Even those who had once overlooked her now nodded in acknowledgement, as if recognizing a queen they had underestimated. Melissa and Cameron sat at the front, their expressions brittle. Melissa's smile trembled at the corners as she rose, clutching her folder of papers like a shield. "Neighbors," she began, her voice pitching too high, "this has all gone too far. Cameron and I have been targeted, harassed, spied on. We're good people. We host events. We've contributed to this neighborhood." A voice from the back cut her off. "You've kept us awake past midnight with your parties," another chimed in, "and built that monstrosity of a deck without permission." Melissa faltered, glancing at Cameron, who glowered at the crowd, his fists tight on the table. From the second row, Darlene rose with quiet authority. She opened her folder, pages organized with the precision of a prosecutor. Her voice was calm, steady, and sharp enough to slice through the Harpers' protests. "Here are the facts," Darlene said. "Unapproved construction. Documented." She held up photographs. "Noise violations logged on 9 separate nights." She held up reports. "Verbal harassment, witnessed and recorded." She tapped the stack of evidence with one manicured finger. "This isn't harassment against them. This is accountability for the rules we've all agreed to live by." Silence followed her words, the weight of them settling across the room. Melissa's face flushed. Cameron's jaw worked furiously. The board chair cleared his throat. "We'll proceed to vote. All in favor of suspending the Harpers' privileges, pool, clubhouse, event participation." Hands went up. One row, then another. Then nearly every seat in the room. All opposed. No hands rose. The vote was unanimous. Melissa gasped as if struck. Cameron surged to his feet, knocking his chair backward with a screech. "This is a damn witch hunt," he shouted. his face crimson. "You're all pathetic." Jealous, small-minded, two HOA security officers approached. Firm but calm. "Sir, you need to leave." Cameron shoved his papers from the table, scattering them across the floor. "You think you can embarrass me?" His voice cracked as they guided him toward the door. "This isn't over." But the neighbors didn't flinch. They watched him go in silence, their judgment louder than any jeer. Melissa trailed after him, shoulders stiff, eyes glassy. Her protests had shriveled into whispers no one listened to. Jeanette sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, her face composed. She didn't gloat, didn't smile. Her victory wasn't in noise but in silence, in the quiet tilt of heads that now bent toward her, instead of her daughter. The meeting adjourned. Neighbors lingered, exchanging glances, shaking Jeanette's hand as they passed. Outside, the night air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle, cicadas humming like a low drumbeat of change. As Jeanette reached her porch, her phone buzzed. Franklin's name lit the screen. "Congratulations," he said when she answered, his voice carrying that steady calm she'd come to trust. "But we're not stopping here." Jeanette's heart quickened. "What do you mean?" "I've filed a cease and desist," Franklin said. "And tomorrow morning the Harpers will be served. We're suing them for elder defamation and coercion. This isn't just neighborhood politics anymore, Jeanette. This is the law." Jeanette leaned against the porch railing, the night air cool against her skin. She closed her eyes, absorbing his words. They had tried to strip her dignity, tried to laugh her into silence. Now the fight was moving to a battlefield. They couldn't charm or bully their way through. Her whisper carried into the night. "Good." The Harper's world tilted the morning the envelopes arrived. White, official, stamped with the seal of Fayette County. Melissa ripped hers open at the kitchen counter, her manicured nails tearing the edge into jagged strips. Her eyes widened, breath catching. "Cameron," she whispered, voice trembling. "It's a summons." Across the room, Cameron's laugh was sharp, hollow. He tore into his own envelope and read the first line aloud. "Notice of civil suit filed by Jeanette Clark." His smirk twisted into something cruel. "Unbelievable. She thinks this will scare us." But the paper in his hands was heavy with more than words. It was a declaration. At Franklin Chase's office, the case took form with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Jeanette sat quietly at the polished oak table while Franklin spread evidence before them: photographs, recordings, printed transcripts of neighborhood complaints. "They mocked you," Franklin said, arranging the pieces like a puzzle. "They tried to coerce authority over you. They isolated you socially. Every word they spat in jest becomes a brick in the wall we'll build against them." Jeanette nodded once, her calm not feigned but practiced. She'd lived her life in silence when hurt. Now that silence was her greatest weapon. Franklin slid her a sheet of paper. "This is your testimony prep. We'll refine it. But I want you to write in your own words what it felt like, what it meant. Jurors don't connect with legalese. They connect with truth." Jeanette uncapped her pen, the ink flowing smoothly across the page. She wrote not with anger but with clarity, the sting of her daughter's laughter, the coldness of being treated like an inconvenience, the weight of loneliness magnified by cruelty. Her handwriting was neat, unwavering. Support came quietly but powerfully. Lacey Grant stopped by the office with a sworn statement, tucked in a manila folder. She set it on Franklin's desk and smoothed the flap with deliberate care. "I've heard their words for years," she said. "The bakery is a crossroads. People talk, and Melissa and Cameron never whispered when it came to Jeanette. They belittled her, mocked her fall, even told customers she was fading. I'll testify to every word." Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with loyalty. Jeanette reached for her hand, squeezing gently. "Thank you," she whispered. Darlene arrived with her own contribution, an evidence trove. She placed a flash drive on Franklin's desk like a crown jewel. "Pulled from Melissa's old email chain," she explained. "She forgot to log out once at a community computer. Let's just say she wasn't careful." Franklin plugged it in. The screen filled with email after email. And there it was, in Melissa's own words, "My mother's a public burden. If she can't manage herself, she needs to be put away. We can't keep covering for her." The room chilled. Franklin leaned back, his smile faint but edged like a blade. "Emails like this don't vanish. They bury defendants." Jeanette sat straighter. She wasn't surprised, not anymore. Disappointed, yes, but hurt had become too familiar to wound her further. Now it was evidence, nothing more. As the weeks unfolded, Franklin sculpted the case. Jeanette rehearsed her testimony until the words flowed like water, calm, steady, unshakable. Lacey practiced her statement under oath. Darlene polished the timeline of violations until it gleamed. The Harpers, meanwhile, scoffed loudly in public. At the bakery, Melissa sneered to anyone who would listen. "It's petty. She's bitter. Who sues their own daughter?" Cameron smirked at the golf club, waving it off as drama from a bored old widow. But when the sheriff's deputy knocked on Melissa's door one Thursday afternoon, their laughter faltered. Melissa opened it. Confusion painted across her face. The deputy handed her a folded paper, crisp and stamped. "Melissa Harper," he said evenly. "You've been served with a restraining order, effective immediately. You are to remain at least 200 feet from Jeanette Clark at all times." Melissa's mouth fell open. "You can't be serious." The deputy didn't flinch. "I suggest you read it carefully, ma'am. Violations carry penalties." Behind her, Cameron sputtered. "This is insane." But the words rang hollow in the thick summer air. Across the street, Jeanette sat on her porch swing, sipping tea, the breeze stirring the hem of her dress. She didn't glance their way, didn't gloat. Her silence, once mocked, had become their verdict. Jeanette climbed the small ladder with care, her ankles stronger now, but every movement still deliberate. She screwed the final camera into place, beneath the eaves of her porch, the lens gleaming like an unblinking eye. From here it caught every angle, the walkway, the mailbox, even the shadows that stretched across the street at night. When she stepped down, Darlene was waiting on the grass, arms folded, nodding approvingly. "They'll think twice now," she said. "Nothing slips past those." It wasn't just Jeanette's house. At the next HOA meeting, Darlene pushed through a motion for new floodlights at the cul-de-sac corners. A week later, tall silver poles went up, bathing the street in clear white light each evening. What had once been Melissa and Cameron's stage for late-night gatherings now felt like a spotlight exposing every crack. The pushback came in whispers. Melissa started receiving postcards in her mailbox, no return address, just stark sentences scrawled in bold black ink. "One banana peel away from assisted living." "Your mother is a burden, says more about you." "Neighbors don't forget laughter that cuts." Each line was her own cruelty, thrown back at her like a mirror she couldn't turn away from. She tore them up in the kitchen, her hands shaking, while Cameron muttered that it had to be Jeanette, but no proof surfaced. Cameron tried to counterstrike. He marched into the HOA office with a stack of complaints against Jeanette, alleged lawn violations, phantom noise disturbances, even a claim about her bird feeder attracting pests. The board reviewed each one, line by line, and dismissed them. "No evidence." The secretary told him flatly. "We can't pursue baseless reports." Cameron stormed out, his shoes slamming against the tile, his pride shrinking with each echo. Meanwhile, Lacey moved to action. She announced a neighborhood watch initiative at the bakery, her chalkboard sign scrawled with big cheerful letters. "Community watch meeting, all welcome." Dozens came. By the end of the night, Jeanette found herself nominated as honorary captain. "You've shown us resilience," Lacey said warmly. "Who better to keep this street safe?" The applause that followed was soft but genuine, the clink of coffee cups, blending with the hum of conversation. For Jeanette, it felt like reclaiming a place she had once lost. The next month's newsletter sealed it. On the front page, framed by roses and ivy, was a photograph of Jeanette on her porch, sunlight catching the silver in her hair. The headline read, "Resilience Spotlight, Jeanette Clark." The article praised her grace, her strength, her quiet leadership in the face of adversity. It mentioned the tea parties, the watch program, her constant kindness to neighbors. It never once mentioned the Harpers, but the omission was louder than an accusation. Melissa crumpled her copy and shoved it deep into the trash. Cameron didn't even pick his up from the mailbox. That evening, Jeanette sat on her swing, the cicadas buzzing, her cameras blinking quietly overhead. The cul-de-sac glowed under the new lights, every shadow chased away. For the first time in months, she felt safe enough to exhale fully, the night air cool in her lungs. Her phone rang, Franklin's name glowing on the screen. When she answered, his voice was calm, steady, but edged with purpose. "Jeanette," he said, "the judge is ready to hear the case." Jeanette's hand stilled on the armrest of the swing. Around her the street was quiet, but the storm was gathering again, this time in a courtroom under oath. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and ink, the air heavy with anticipation. The judge's gavel cracked once, silencing the murmurs of onlookers. Melissa sat at the defendant's table in a pale blazer, her posture stiff, hands wringing the edge of her skirt. Cameron slouched beside her, eyes narrowed, jaw tight, as though the entire proceeding was beneath him. "Mrs. Harper," the attorney prompted, "you may begin your testimony." Melissa rose, voice trembling as she addressed the court. "This is all a misunderstanding," she began. "My mother, Jeanette, she exaggerates. She always has. We were only ever concerned for her well-being." Her eyes darted nervously to the jury. Any remarks made, they were jokes. Families tease. That's all it was. Her words landed hollow. The silence that followed wasn't sympathy. It was doubt. Then it was Cameron's turn. He leaned back in the witness chair, shrugging with forced nonchalance. "I never mocked her," he said. "This whole thing? It's retaliation. She's bitter. We didn't spend every waking hour babysitting her. She's making mountains out of molehills." Franklin Chase rose calmly, pressing a button on the laptop in front of him. The speakers crackled. Then Cameron's own voice filled the room. "Whole neighborhood's gonna need guardrails once she starts walking around again." The jury stiffened. Melissa's laugh followed, cruel and unmistakable. "Why doesn't she just go to a home?" The sound lingered in the air like smoke, choking any defense they had left. Cameron's jaw twitched, but he said nothing. Melissa's face crumpled, her eyes glistening as she looked away. "Those," Franklin said smoothly, "are not molehills." When Jeanette took the stand, the room shifted. She moved slowly, her cane tapping against the polished floor, but her posture was straight, her chin lifted. The jurors leaned forward. The judge adjusted his glasses. Even Melissa's shoulders seemed to sink. "Mrs. Clark," Franklin said gently, "can you describe what you experienced?" Jeanette's voice was quiet, but it carried. "My daughter and son-in-law laughed when I fell. They mocked me in my pain. They told others I was a burden." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. Steady, it wasn't just words. It was abandonment, neglect. A message over and over, that my life mattered less than their convenience, that I was something to ridicule. As she spoke, the faint scent of lemon polish from the benches mingled with the weight of silence. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just listening. Franklin played the recordings again, this time with Jeanette's words layered before them, the audio cut deeper. The jury's faces hardened. A woman in the front row crossing her arms tightly, a man shaking his head. Even the judge shifted uncomfortably, tapping his pen against the bench, as if to anchor himself against the cruelty in the voices. Jeanette's final words came clear, unwavering. "They laughed when I fell, but I stood up." The sentence hung in the courtroom like a bell tolling. When she stepped down, cane tapping, the room felt altered, charged with the weight of truth. Franklin closed his folder with quiet certainty. Melissa sat pale and shaking, Cameron rigid, his knuckles white against the table. The judge's gavel cracked once more. "This court rules in favor of Jeanette Clark," he declared, his voice firm. "Full damages awarded. The defendants are found liable for defamation, harassment, and attempted coercion." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Jeanette exhaled, her hand tightening briefly on the rail before she returned to her seat. For once, she didn't need to whisper to herself. The judgment had spoken for her. The ruling had barely cooled on the judge's lips before the consequences began to unfold. The Harpers, once smug rulers of the cul-de-sac, now found themselves tethered to a debt they could neither laugh off nor ignore. The judgment arrived in black and white restitution, damages and full coverage of Jeanette Clark's legal fees. The figure printed at the bottom was enough to make Melissa stagger in her kitchen, clutching the counter as though the granite itself might hold her upright. Cameron cursed loud enough for neighbors to hear, his fist pounding the refrigerator door until the magnets rattled. But fury didn't loosen the noose. The garnishments began within days. Their once plump checking account dwindled with every automated deduction, line after line of withdrawals marked court-ordered. Cameron's paycheck hit their account on a Friday. By Monday most of it was gone. Melissa's credit cards, long abused for salon visits and boutique clothes, went into collections. And then came the HOA. At the next meeting, Darlene announced it with her usual calm smile. Due to repeated violations and excess administrative time spent addressing them, the Harper household will see an increase in their dues. The motion passed without debate. Melissa's protests, "This is unfair. This is punishment," were ignored. The couple stopped appearing at neighborhood gatherings. Their driveway, once filled with cars and catered laughter, sat empty. The pergola Cameron had tried to build sagged unfinished, wood bleaching in the sun. One morning, a white sign appeared on their lawn, "For sale." No announcement, no open house, just silence and shame wrapped around the listing. The neighbors noticed. They always noticed. Jeanette, meanwhile, found her days filling with something new. Joy? The block threw a party one Saturday evening. Tables lined with casseroles and pies stretched across the cul-de-sac. Children darted in and out of sprinklers, laughter spilling across the lawns. But the Harpers' house stayed dark, blinds drawn, the for sale sign watching over them like a tombstone. Jeanette sat at the head of a long table, a glass of sweet tea sweating in her hand. Lacey handed out frosted cupcakes. Neighbors stopped by to squeeze Jeanette's hand or pat her shoulder, their words warm, their gratitude quiet but real. As the sun dipped low, Darlene stood, holding a small plaque wrapped in brown paper. She placed it in Jeanette's hands, urging her to unwrap it. Inside was a slab of stone etched with 3 words: planted, survived, bloomed. Jeanette traced the letters with her fingertips, the rough grooves grounding her. Her throat tightened, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me." The neighbors applauded softly, the kind of applause that wasn't for spectacle but for solidarity. Later that week, Jeanette tended her roses, the plaque now nestled among the blooms. The late summer air smelled of earth and sweet petals, cicadas humming in the trees. For the first time in months, the cul-de-sac felt still, settled. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Clark," the voice on the other end asked. It was warm, professional, carrying the cadence of someone used to being heard. "This is Mariah Kelly. I'm a journalist with American Life Monthly. We've been following your case." Jeanette froze, pruning shears still in her hand. "Following," she repeated carefully. "Yes," Mariah said. "The court documents, the HOA filings, even the neighborhood's online chatter. It's a compelling story about resilience, about standing up to family cruelty. We'd like to run a feature on you. A national piece." Jeanette's breath caught. The cicadas seemed to hush for a beat, the world pausing on the edge of change. Her story, once confined to whispers and laughter behind closed doors, was now reaching beyond Lexington, beyond the cul-de-sac. She tightened her grip on the shears, her whisper barely audible. "A story they can't rewrite." Jeanette sat at her dining table, the faint smell of roses drifting in from the open window, as the journalist pressed record. Mariah Kelly's notepad rested neatly beside her, but her eyes, sharp, empathetic, unblinking, were fixed only on Jeanette. "Tell me," Mariah said gently, "what it meant to hear your own daughter laugh at your pain." Jeanette didn't look away. Her hands were folded, her cane leaning nearby, sunlight streaking across the table. It meant I wasn't a mother to her anymore, she said softly. Not in her eyes. I was a burden. A joke. But I decided I'd rather be underestimated than erased. Mariah leaned closer, pen poised, and when you fought back. Jeanette's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. I didn't fight with fists. I fought with silence, with proof, with patience. And patience always outlasts laughter. 2 weeks later, the headline broke across glossy pages and glowing screens, How a Grandmother Took Her Power Back, the Jeanette Clark story. The spread carried photographs of Jeanette in her garden, pearls glinting at her throat, cane balanced like a staff of quiet command. The text painted her not as fragile but as formidable. Her ordeal was framed not as scandal but as survival. Neighbors lined up at Lacey's bakery just to buy extra copies of the magazine, passing them across counters with knowing smiles. In living rooms across Kentucky, readers underlined Jeanette's quotes, whispering to daughters and husbands, read this. Melissa and Cameron didn't linger to see it unfold. Their for sale sign turned to sold in less than a month, their windows shuttered, their departure quiet. They slipped out of the cul-de-sac one gray morning, car trunks stuffed, faces hidden, not even a wave goodbye, and no one waved back. The letters began pouring in, handwritten notes with loops and flourishes, emails typed in trembling fonts, even postcards scrawled in hurried ink. Women from Ohio, Texas, California, all telling Jeanette the same thing. Your story is mine. You gave me courage. You made me feel less alone. Jeanette sat on her porch swing at dusk, envelope after envelope in her lap. Some carried the scent of lavender. Others bore stains where tears had fallen onto paper. She read each one, pressing them gently into a box she labeled, Keep. One note simply read, You made me believe silence can be loud. At the bakery, Lacey unveiled a new treat, Jeanette's Justice bars. Oats honey, chocolate, with a hint of lemon zest. She placed the first tray in the glass case, the scent warm and sharp, and told every customer the same thing. It's resilience you can taste. Jeanette laughed when she saw them, though her eyes glistened. You didn't have to. Oh, I did. Lacey interrupted with a wink. Some stories deserve sweetness at the end. Darlene, never one to waste an opportunity, framed the magazine cover and hung it in the HOA clubhouse, right at the entrance, where every resident had to pass by. A reminder, she said, of what resilience looks like when the rules are respected. The cover caught the light, Jeanette's image looking out over the foyer, no longer ignored or mocked but celebrated. One evening, as twilight painted the cul-de-sac in soft gold, Jeanette stood by her window, gaze drifting toward her garden. She blinked, startled. Neighbors were in her yard, not to gossip or to pry, but to work. 3 families knelt in the dirt, pulling weeds. Children carried watering cans. Someone planted fresh marigolds beside her roses, the air filled with the smell of damp earth and blossoms. Laughter rose, not cruel, not sharp, but warm, shared, communal. Jeanette stepped onto her porch, her breath catching. They looked up and smiled. Her garden was no longer hers alone. The morning was soft, touched with the kind of light that makes even ordinary porches glow like altars. Jeanette sat in her wicker chair, steam curling from her coffee cup, the scent of roasted beans mingling with the roses blooming along her walkway. The street was quiet except for the faint creak of swings and the flutter of wings at the feeder. For the first time in months, her chest carried no heaviness, no waiting for another cruel laugh, no bracing for another blow. Just calm, just peace. The crunch of gravel broke the stillness. Darlene appeared, walking up the path with a bundle of roses tucked under her arm, their petals red as velvet. She set them on the table beside Jeanette's cup and smirked. Thought your porch needed more bragging rights, she said. Jeanette chuckled, her fingers brushing the blooms. You've already given me too much. Impossible, Darlene replied, lowering herself into the opposite chair. Her eyes softened as she glanced around the yard. Fresh mulch in the beds, neighbors' flowers intertwined along the fence. Look at this place. It's alive again. Just like you. Jeanette didn't argue. She let the compliment rest in the air. As warm as the morning sun, along the fence line, little bursts of color caught her eye. Birdhouses, 12 of them painted in blues, yellows, and reds, perched like cheerful guardians. The wood was smooth, nails even, every corner sealed with care. They hadn't been bought, they'd been built. A month ago, she had suggested a community project at the watch meeting. Something simple, something that gave the neighborhood ownership of beauty again. One by one, families showed up in her backyard with scraps of wood, paintbrushes, and willing hands. Children had splattered more paint than they spread, but their laughter had lifted the air. Adults sanded, hammered, and hung the boxes until the fence became a mural of care. Now sparrows darted in and out of the tiny houses, their chirps weaving into the hum of the morning. "They look good, don't they?" Darlene said, following Jeanette's gaze. "They look like home," Jeanette answered. By mid-morning, Lacey appeared, her bakery apron dusted with flour, a wicker basket in hand. The smell of butter and sugar announced her before she reached the porch. "I didn't label these," she said with a grin, setting the basket down. "No occasion, no clever name, just because pastries." Jeanette peeked inside. Croissants glistened with glaze, muffins rose golden, cookies studded with chocolate, winked in the sun. Her mouth watered, but more than that, her heart swelled at the gesture. "Just because," she repeated softly. "That's reason enough." Lacey smiled and squeezed her shoulder before heading off to the bakery, the sound of her footsteps fading down the walk. When Jeanette returned to her chair, a white envelope rested on the table. Franklin had slipped it into her mailbox earlier that morning, his handwriting crisp on the front. She opened it slowly, the paper cool between her fingers. Inside, the letter was brief, almost clinical: "Case closed. Record sealed. No further action required. You've won, Jeanette. Nothing left to prove." Her eyes lingered on that last line. Nothing left to prove. She folded the letter neatly, sliding it into the drawer of the porch table, not to hide it but to keep it as a reminder. Battles were not meant to be lived in forever. Peace was the truest prize. That afternoon, a moving truck rumbled up to the old Harper house. Jeanette set her cup down, leaning forward as a young couple climbed out. A man in jeans and a woman in a sundress, their hands clasped tight, eyes bright with possibility. They noticed her watching and waved warmly. "Hi there," the woman called. "We're the Johnsons. Just moved in. We've heard this is a wonderful neighborhood." Jeanette smiled, the kind that reached her eyes. She lifted her hand in return. "It is," she said simply. "It really is." The couple disappeared inside, the sound of their laughter spilling faintly out the open door. Not sharp, not cruel, but light, unburdened. Jeanette sat back in her chair, coffee cooling, roses fragrant, birdhouses alive with wings. She glanced at the plaque nestled in her garden. Planted, survived, bloomed. Her gaze lifted to the cul-de-sac that had once been a battlefield and was now a sanctuary. Her final thought was quiet but firm, a truth etched into her bones. "I gave them their punchline and kept the whole story for myself."